Let's cross to India, where my co-host Avani Dias joins us from New Delhi. And Av, you're just back from Bhutan, is that right?
Yeah, it's been such an interesting week here, Mark, in the region. I've gone to what's known as the Forbidden Kingdom and the happiest nation on earth. It was so amazing in terms of natural beauty, but under the surface, there are so many issues going on in that country. And I went there to see what it's like being wedged between two massive superpowers. To the north of Bhutan is China, to the south is India, and Bhutan is this tiny nation, and it promotes this idea of happiness. It's a world famous philosophy, but what we are seeing is one of the least developed countries in the world, and Australia has just sent its first minister there because of Bhutan's close proximity to China. Mark, I also spoke to the Prime Minister of Bhutan, and he's told me that his country is really close to settling a decades-long border dispute with China, so definitely going to send alarm bells around the nation in terms of countries like India and Australia trying to tackle Beijing's influence.
Well, we should talk about the diplomatic fallout from the American President Joe Biden pulling out of the Quad Summit. Of course, there were supposed to be leaders of Australia, Japan and India, but the leaders will have meetings, Avani, at the G7 in the sidelines.
Yeah, so this has been a really interesting week with Biden pulling out of his Australia trip. Narendra Modi has decided that he will still go ahead with his planned trips to Japan, PNG as well as Australia, and India being on the sidelines of the G7 is a big deal for a country that wants to be the next big superpower. And the G7 is of course made up of the world's biggest IMF economies as well as liberal democracies, and India really wants a proper seat at that table. And so for quite a few G7 meetings now, India has been invited, and it says that it's representing the global south, the developing countries that are facing the repercussions of decisions made by these major economies. We know that issues around China will come up, Taiwan as well as the Russia-Ukraine war, all issues which India now has a stake in.
And of course, Narendra Modi will be going to America next month, but his visit may be overshadowed by the State Department's annual report on religious freedoms, Avani, which is critical of attacks on Muslims and Christians in, of course, what is now the world's most populous nation.
That's right, and Mark, as we've spoken about a lot on this show, the Indian government has been criticised by a lot of human rights groups, minorities here in India, for its Hindu nationalist policies and its treatment of especially the Muslim and Christian minorities, its policies which seem to discriminate, according to critics, of those various religious groups. Modi is, of course, going to an election this time next year, so it's a really critical time. But what's been interesting is that representatives from the US have made some criticisms in regards to those religious issues, and that will coincide with this trip that is coming up next month. But in terms of his trip to Australia, one that he's still committed to when the other Quad leaders have dropped out, that's a really good sign for the Australian government, because what we've seen is this continual coming together of those two countries. And when I speak to Australian ministers and the Australian Prime Minister, when they've come on visits here, they've actually ignored that issue of religious persecution and the criticisms of the Indian government, just promoting that these two major economies and countries are coming together. So it's a really interesting contrast to watch how these different countries are approaching India's criticisms on the ground.
And of course, it has been a tough week for the Indian PM. His party, the BJP, lost its only foothold in the country's south after voters in the Karnataka Avani rejected the party.
Mark, that was a really fascinating result to watch. So Karnataka, as you say, it's in the south of the country, but it's a massive state. I've been there and it's so diverse. On one side there's Bangalore, which is the tech hub of India. Then you've got tea stations in hill country. So there's a really vast population of more than 65 million people. But the BJP only held Karnataka in terms of a government in the south of India. It was a really big stronghold. And we saw over the years of the BJP's term really strong Hindu nationalist policies coming out. The biggest one probably was the banning of the hijab at schools, which caused a lot of controversy last year. And so some analysts are saying that this is an indictment for the Modi government. Others are saying, well, Modi's still really popular on the ground and he'll manage to keep that support going in the lead up to next year's election.
Well, we actually spoke to Danya Rajendran. She's the editor-in-chief of the News Minute, which is a South Indian publication based in Karnataka, about the election.
The Congress win in Karnataka this time, I wouldn't call it a surprise, but the extent of their win is definitely a surprise. I don't think even the Congress expected that they would get such a huge mandate. The BJP has been trying its best to really grow in the south, but it does not look like immediately the BJP would be ruling any of the southern states because there is resistance. One is that southern states have strong regional parties. The communists are also strong in at least one state. And there is a strong secular fabric too. There is a lot of resistance in southern India. For example, in Karnataka, when there was an economic boycott of Muslims at Hindu trade fairs, there was a lot of resistance from civil society.
For more, we are joined by Dr. Ashok Sharma, a visiting fellow at the University of New South Wales, Canberra, at the Australian Defence Force Academy. He's, of course, an expert in global security and geopolitics. Dr. Sharma, welcome to India Now.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
So, President Biden pulled out of the Quad meeting in Australia, but he is still going to the G7. I'm wondering for you, what do you think that says about the Quad? Is it as important as perhaps we've made it out to be?
It was Biden who elevated it to the summit level meeting in March 2021. And since then, Quad leaders have met 4 times. So it is well established. There's a confidence between all these 4 countries. There is a 2+2 dialogue going around between these all 4 countries. So it's well established now. So Quad is not going to be affected. But yes, it gives a message not a good message to the Pacific countries and the small countries who are looking for American presence and more presence of these Quad countries in this region, and especially Pacific nations.
It's worth pointing out that India has been criticised for buying oil from Russia, sort of accused of playing at both sides. How is it you reckon they've managed to avoid criticism on it in a way that other countries haven't?
I think it's a kind of mutual trust and confidence, especially with the United States, the way India-US relationship has developed. And when it was being developed during the early years of 2000, like this century, it was decided that it will be independent of Indo-Russian or US-Pakistan concern, that relationship, and it is independent of these kind of things. India is not going to leave Russia. It's a long-standing defense partner. Still, more than 50-60% armories are from Russia. And it is strategically important for India to hold on Russia. And at the same time, Americans and the Western powers know that India is a kind of a mediator, and it holds Russia not totally going towards China. So this is a kind of a very, I would say, a balancing strategy, where if India leaves Russia, then Russia, China, Pakistan all together coming, it will be trouble for India. Why should India leave Russia? So this has been conveyed very well by Indian authorities to all the Quad leaders, and they understand India's strategic position.
It does seem like the Modi government puts a lot of effort into the Indian diaspora around the world. And I'm curious why. Why does that matter so much to the Indian government?
Economic reason is that it comes from remittances. India is the highest recipient of remittances all over the world. It's through its diaspora. It has a 4th highest foreign exchange reserves, and 570 around that. And out of that, around $70 to $80 billion comes from its remittances every year. India sends, I think, 2.5 million people every year. They go out of its highest, and it has 32 million diaspora across, including NRIs, non-resident Indians, who are Indian citizens, but they are living outside, PIOs, and Indian ancestry, or those who have taken citizenship of different countries. So if you look at the entire thing, this is one, that India obviously has to look to its diaspora. They are attached to India. But another economic angle is there, and you can see the remittances coming, and the kind of bridging role they play between India and the United States is an extraordinary thing.
I cannot leave without asking you about one thing that I'm extremely fascinated by. We know the Indian government is particularly keen on a huge repatriation of its artefacts from around the world, and crucially among that is the Kohinoor diamond, which is in the Crown Jewels in the UK. Why does Modi want the Kohinoor back so badly? Why do you think it's important to him?
I think it's more of a pride. Look, the BJP comes with a kind of revivalism and a bit of pride and that kind of foreign policy. If you look at in BJP manifesto, a rightful place in the world. So they think that we have been we met with the injustice for 200 years, economic exploitation from richest country to one of the poorest country we became, and then so we are re-emerging. So let's take some symbol, and so maybe that could be one of the reasons that they need that Kohinoor back.
But when he gets it back, what's he going to do? Because it comes from the fort of Lahore. He's going to have to work out what he does with it, if he ever gets it back. And I remain sceptical whether it'll ever come back.
It's just it will be, we got our back. It's just, I said that it's a bit of revivalism, but it's not a very negative sense. It's just like, give us back our place. That's what India is trying to re-emerge in the world. And India it's not like a rightful place in the world was in 2014 manifesto of BJP, But now it is changing into a meaningful role in the global affairs.
Dr. Ashok Sharma, it is lovely to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on India Now.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, if you take a walk through any market in India, it may seem as though nothing much has changed over the years, except for the QR codes now adorning every stall.
For a country that relied heavily on cash, there's now a digital payments revolution taking place on the ground here with hundreds of millions of transactions every day.
Tejas Bhatt has the story.
So it's very simple. Whether it's Paytm, Google Pay, Phone Pay, anything, they can scan and they just pay.
There's no need to carry your money anymore. Your money is in the bank, so you can pay directly through that. I mean, it's very safe, I feel.
पूरी दुनिया में 40% हिस्सेदारी अकेले भारत की है.
Digital payments, where you use your phone to scan and pay for goods, are now everywhere in India. And the IMF says that India has one of the fastest growth rates of digital payments of any nation in the world. But just a few years ago, India's financial landscape looked completely different.
Most of the transactions used to happen in cash. So cash was king. Only a small subset of merchants had point of purchase machines. So if you landed in India today, you'd see the ubiquitous QR code, even the chai wala on the street brandishing the QR codes.
So what were some of the factors that led to the massive uptake of digital payments?
My PNB UPI app has made sending and receiving money convenient and simple.
All of this has been driven through a slew of government-initiated programs, especially the Digital India program and the adoption of digital payments. But the idea of digital payments really took root post-demonetization.
Back in 2016, the government declared the 500 rupee and 1000 rupee banknotes invalid. Citizens could hand in their old banknotes in exchange for new ones. It was done to try and curb black money, corruption, and the circulation of counterfeit notes.
Reliance also came out with their Jio product, which gave Indians unfettered access to the internet via very cheap data.
Now India will fly. Jio is here.
And thanks to COVID, that gave the final push. People were less trustful of handling physical cash.
The key component in all of this is India's homegrown digital payment system, known as the Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, which was launched in 2016.
UPI chalega. UPI se doston ko paise.
And this system essentially allows real-time transfer of money between two individuals. So all that they need is a mobile phone number to send money from one person to another.
Many of the top digital payment platforms in India use the UPI, like Paytm, Google Pay, and PhonePe. And the numbers on India's UPI system are staggering. In the month of March alone this year, there were more than 8 billion transactions recorded at a total value of over 250 billion Australian dollars.
ನಮ್ಮದು ಮಿಲ್ಕ್ ಪಾರ್ಲರ್ ಶಾಪು ನಾವು ಅಂಗಡಿ ಮಾಡಿ 3 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು 3 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಡಿಜಿಟಲ್ ಪೇಮೆಂಟು ಬಗ್ಗೆನೇ ನಾವು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಾಕ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ವಿ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅಡ್ವಾಂಟೇಜ್ ಏನಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ನಮಗೊಂದು ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಬರ್ತಾಯಿದೆ ಮತ್ತು ಒಂದು ಸೌಂಡ್ ಬಾಕ್ಸ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟವ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಹಾಕಿದೆ ಅಂತಲೂ ಅದರಲ್ಲೇ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗೋದು.
When it used to be cash business, earlier we had no clue. what was the income, what was the outcome. In cash business, it's like 1 or 2 rupees is a big headache.
But in some parts of the country, cash is still king.
ನಾವು ಸುಮಾರು 2 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಇದೇ ವ್ಯಾಪಾರ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಸೊಪ್ಪು ತರಕಾರಿ. ನಾವು ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಂಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಈಗ ನಡೀತಾ ಇರೋ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಡಿಜಿಟಲ್ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ನಮಗೆ ಅನುಕೂಲ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಆದರೆ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಹೋಗಿ ಅದನ್ನು ಮತ್ತೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಫರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದಾಗ ರೈತರ ಹತ್ರ ನಾವು ತಗೊಂಬರ್ತೀವಿ. ರೈತರ ಹತ್ರ ಫೋನ್ಪೇ ಇರಲ್ಲ, ಗೂಗಲ್ ಪೇ ಇರಲ್ಲ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕ್ಯಾಶ್ ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ 10 ರೂಪಾಯಿಗೆ 500 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಆ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಬಂದು ಪೇಟಿಎಮ್ ಅಂತ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೆ ನಮಗೆ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ.
A lack of access to smartphones, awareness of digital payment services, and the knowledge on how to use these services can widen the urban-rural divide.
When we take large-scale digital transformations, such as the Digital India program, for instance, there could potential digital divides that might emerge, because not everyone has the capabilities and skills to benefit from these growth opportunities. So hopefully, going forward, everyone will benefit from India's growth story.
I mean, from the time digital payments have started, it's just pros, no cons at all.
ಅಫಿಷಿಯಲ್ಗೆ ಅನುಕೂಲ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಆದರೆ ನಮಗೇನಾಗ್ತದೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನಂಬ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋದೇ ಚಿಲ್ಲರೆ ಕಾಸಲ್ಲಿ. ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಆನ್ಲೈನ್ಗೆ ತೊಗೊಂಡೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಎಲ್ಲ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕಿಗೆ ಹೋಯ್ತು ಅಂದರೆ ಆ ಚಿಲ್ಲರೆ ಕಾಸು ನಮ್ಮ ಕೈಗೆ ಸಿಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಕಷ್ಟ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ.
India is believed to be the home of the world's largest LGBTQIA community. That is some 135 million people. But the country remains conservative when it comes to marriage. However, that could soon be about to change. In a landmark case, a group of 18 same-sex couples petitioned India's Supreme Court to legalise same-sex marriage. The court is expected to announce its decision in the coming days. Now, if it's successful, it will be another milestone in the fight for equal rights for India's minorities. The Supreme Court decriminalised same-sex relations back in 2018, and in 2014 it recognised India's transgender community as a third gender.
One of the campaigners for change is activist Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi. Her organisation, Astitwa, led the fight to recognise the rights of trans people across India.
And she says it's a battle that's far from over.
Hijras is the oldest ethnic transgender group. Culturally, religiously, a complete different culture they follow. They fall under the big umbrella of transgenders. In Pakistan, there they are known as Sarai Khwajas. India, they are known as Hijras, Kinnars, and many different names. In Bangladesh, they are known as Hijras. And in Tarai region of Nepal, they are known as Mithis. It's one of the oldest group of trans women, basically. I believe children should be taught to respect every gender. Because there are atrocities against women, there are atrocities against trans women, trans man in the society because of the patriarchy in which we are. Before 2014, we didn't have any legal right as an Indian. We were not accepted by the government as equal to any man and woman. So there was a lot of discrimination, stigma. People were pushed out of the house. People were beaten by father, brothers, and by family members for being trans. Traditional work of the Hijras are basically blessing when a child is born, blessing when there is a marriage happening. Then people are into begging on the streets. People are also into sex work. There was no way that people could talk about jobs, people could talk about dignified livelihood, people could talk about entrepreneurship. I was so feminine as a child, and every people would bully me in the corridors of the school. I was scared to go to the bathroom. I was sexually abused at a very young age. My parents accepted me. My parents stood strong My siblings stood strong. They gave me moral support. And today, whatever I am, I'm thanks to my parents, I'm proud to be a trans woman. I'm proud to live every day to the fullest.
India's Supreme Court ruled in favour of giving rights to the transgender community and created a third gender.
The biggest achievement was in 2014 when we had the verdict. We won the case. When it becomes legal somewhere, things change. There is lots more to change, and there is a lot of way to go. But this whole system and perspective looking towards transgender people has changed per se in the country. My organization have been doing targeted intervention for HIV/AIDS program. We are doing entrepreneurship. We have employed 450 transgender people across different genres of work. We train them and we employ them. I want to see in the coming years that transgenders don't face stigma and discrimination, don't face ostracization by the families. It's an ongoing process of advocacy. It's an ongoing process to bring down the stigma and discrimination, and still there is a lot more to be done, and our organization is still working on it.
Tigers were once in abundance across India, but like many of the world's exotic animals, hunting and habitat loss led to a decline to the brink of extinction.
But now, thanks to recent conservation efforts, tiger numbers have finally started to edge back up. But what does that conservation mean for the Indigenous communities who've lived alongside the animals for centuries? And look, just a warning, this story does contain images that some viewers may find distressing.
For the past half a century, India has been at the forefront of tiger conservation.
India is the largest tiger range country in the world.
With more than 3,000 tigers, India is now home to 70% of the world's tiger population. But it wasn't always that way.
Tigers were being decimated due to hunting, both by the Indian royalty and the British. And throughout the period, there was a huge amount of deforestation. There was no legal framework to protect wildlife.
Hunting and habitat loss reduced tiger numbers from 40,000 at the beginning of the 20th century to less than 2,000 by 1970.
We were in a situation that we would have lost probably all wild tigers.
Hunting was finally banned in 1972 after a census showed India's tigers were fast going extinct, and Project Tiger was launched by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi a year later.
Project Tiger was born to protect the land of the tiger. 9 tiger reserves were set aside at that time, representing different ecological systems. And in 1972, the Wildlife Protection Act set up a strong legal framework to protect tigers.
India is a country where protecting nature is a part of culture.
But while India can now boast the world's highest number of tigers, it also has the world's highest level of tiger poaching.
No tiger is safe as long as they demand for tiger products. Its bones, its whiskers, its penis, for heaven's sake, everything for traditional Chinese medicine.
But tiger conservation has come at a cost.
ಯಾಕೆಲ್ಲ ಬೇರೆ ಮಾತು ಹೇಳೋದು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಷ್ಟೇ. ಪರ್ಮಿಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಪೂಜೆ ಮಾಡಕ್ ಬಿಡಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಹೇಳೋದು.
ಹೊರ ಹೋದ ನಂತರ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಾಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಕ ಸಾಂಪ್ರದಾಯಿಕ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾಷೆ ಕಳ್ಕೊಂಡ ನಂತರದಲ್ಲಿ ಸುಮಾರು ಜನ ಸಾಯ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಸಾವನ್ನಪ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಒಂದು ಏನು ಸಂತತಿ ಏನಿದೆ ನಶಿಸುವ ಒಂದು ಹಂತಕ್ಕೆ ತಲುಪ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಈ ಕಾರಣದಿಂದಾಗಿ.
The Genu Kuruba are a tribal community from the mountainous Nilgiris area, bordering the states of Tamil Nadu, Kerala and Karnataka. They say they've been displaced by tiger conservation and forced into labouring for local farmers.
ಹೊರ ಬಂದಂತವರು ಇವತ್ತಿಗೆ ಕೊಡಗಿನ ಒಂದು ಕಾಫಿ ತೋಟದ ಲೈನ್ ಮನೆಯ ಜೀತದಾಳುಗಳಾಗಿ ಬದುಕುವಂತ ಒಂದು ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಇದೆ.
There is in fact a study from Chitwan National Park that show that tigers and people use these same landscapes. Tiger use it at night and people by day.
And while the custodians of the forest are being evicted, thousands of tourists are welcomed.
They have invited investment from businesses into tiger conservation. There is this huge investment in camera traps, in estimation machineries, drones. So these are, in some sense, commodified landscapes. Ecotourism is another big earner of revenue.
Shivu says he wants to go back to a life where indigenous communities and tigers live together.
ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಈ ಅರಣ್ಯ ಪ್ರದೇಶ ಉಳಿಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂತೂ ಸಾಧ್ಯನೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅರಣ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ನಾವು ಸಹಿತ ಬದುಕಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ, ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಣಿಗಳು ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ನಾವು ಸಹಿತ ಬದುಕಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ.
Critics say India's conservation policies are heavily influenced by American environmentalism and prejudiced against indigenous communities.
This has a colonial history because you have a bureaucracy that was trained, hierarchicized and set up by the British. And India is a deeply caste-based, racialized society. And this follows a long legacy of protection under the British, beginning in the 1880s, when they reserved forests for timber. And these reserve forests were then converted to wildlife sanctuaries following the Yellowstone model of fortress conservation.
The 2006 Forest Rights Act legally recognised the rights of communities to live in forests and manage the land. But some experts say it's not that simple.
The strategies for tiger conservation is that the core areas of tiger reserve be undisturbed. And this is scientifically established that tigers do need undisturbed spaces for successful breeding. But it's very complex living with tigers. One of my research sites, we have 40 to 50 people killed every year by tigers.
And adding to the squeeze on both tribal land and tigers is the larger issue of encroachment. Indigenous communities all over the country have had land wrested by private companies, developers, and even state governments, all keen on rapid urbanisation. But Shivu says he and his people won't give up the fight to reclaim their land and their way of life.
ಅರಣ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ಸಾಂಪ್ರದಾಯಿಕ ವಾಸಸ್ಥಾನ ಆಗಿರುವಂತ ಪ್ರದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಮತ್ತೆ ಕಾಡು ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಡಿನ ಮಿಕ್ಕಗಳು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಾಣಿಗಳು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಏನಿದೆ, ಆನೆ, ಹುಲಿ, ಕರಡಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ಹಿರಿಕರು ಅದನ್ನೇ ಆರಾಧಿಸಿ ಅದನ್ನೇ ದೇವ್ರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ನಾವು ನಂಬ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿರುವಂತ ಸಮುದಾಯ.